My Life Without Jesus, a memoir. For Sean, brother, friend, Shihan. A note from the author. This book is an unfinished product, a less than perfect attempt at describing something that is literally indescribable. My account of the last 35 years encapsulates the times I was able to spend in Jesus' presence within me, as well as the many, many times he felt far away and inaccessible. To actually experience his love is impossible to comprehend, never mind write about. So I am content within the confines of this book to describe the circumstances in which it occurred, together with my inner processes that brought me either closer to him or kept me away. Only in putting everything to paper did it become clear to me how long and how fervently I had been searching for him. It began even before I was aware that I was on a quest. My views depart from the more traditional image of Jesus in almost every aspect. And yet, the end results of every individual path must be the same, as the love he symbolizes is universal and reaches beyond formal religion to a place where we are all joined together in one unifying and unified experience. This story begins in my early 20s and reaches up to the present day. As non-traditional as my views of Jesus are, this book is not a true memoir, but an amalgam of anecdotes and insights, writings and quotes, hopefully providing a close to true picture of one fellow traveler's journey on the road to peace. It's a long road. It can seem hopeless and perilous at times. But if only one thought of this account stays with my reader, I hope it is this. We are never alone, and always close to the ever-present love within us. His arms are always stretched out to embrace us, in whichever way we are able to receive them. Very truly yours, Stefan Boltz, Highland, New York, in May 2021. While you made plans for death, he led you gently to eternal life. A Course in Miracles workbook, lesson 135, 18.4. Chapter 1, 1987 to 1994. Beginnings. I don't know when I actually opened the door and Jesus entered. It wasn't a one-time occurrence, rather a series of moments over time during which I opened the door briefly, only to slam it shut again, not to touch it for months. One moment stands out in my memory as a turning point, a beginning of sorts. I was 22 and driving home from work. I had the distinct feeling that something was amiss, that there must be more to life than what I was experiencing. At that time, I was in the German army, married to a lovely wife, with a son on his way, and living in a nice apartment. I should have been happy. Looking at my life from the outside, there was no reason that I wasn't. And yet, there was something missing. It was a vague pain, like a toothache that isn't fully blown, and only slightly more than mere discomfort. Looking back, I think I felt a deep longing inside that I wasn't able to grasp or acknowledge, never mind know where it came from. Even though I grew up Catholic and had attended church regularly in my childhood, topics like God, Jesus, faith, and its practical application had very little influence on me. My parents got divorced when I was 11, and I went to live with my father and my sister with my mother. I wasn't a good student by any means, had very little to no motivation to study, and barely made it through school. After I graduated, I applied for an apprenticeship at the company my dad was employed at. Because he worked there, I was able to take the exam. My grades weren't good, but my test results were decent enough, and in September of 1982, I started an apprenticeship to become a machine electrician. I was 17 at the time. I met my first wife, Heike, that summer. At that time, I wasn't aware of anything within me that would propel me onto a spiritual path. The apprenticeship lasted 3.5 years, and afterward I signed up for the German army. I simply couldn't see myself working at the factory and was wrapped up in the notion of an adventure, induced by the many novels I'd read in the likes of The Bourne Identity by Robert Ludlum and Where Eagles Dare by Alistair MacLean. Heike and I got married after basic training and we moved to Berchtesgaden, a small town in the German Alps. Looking back now, I can see the dull pain I began to become aware of. It was too soon for it to be vocalized, but it was present. Not as anything specific, but rather a lingering feeling of restlessness and unfulfillment. We stayed in Berchtesgaden for a year before I became a sergeant and transferred to a communications battalion in Würzburg, my hometown. We moved back and into a small apartment right outside of town. Heike was pregnant and we prepared for our son's arrival. In the midst of it and on my way home from work, I let what I had felt for a while now but unable to express rise to the surface. I should have been happy. But even with a son on the way, a good job and overall a nice life, I felt desperate. In the car that day, I feared that the feeling I had, the state I was in, would never change. I felt a big hole within me and one I was sure I could never fill. I found myself asking the question whether this, my life, was all there was, or if there was something else, something bigger, and perhaps something I was missing altogether. I didn't have an answer. Only a burning question that rose from the core of my being, and because I didn't have an answer, the question stayed with me. Subconsciously, I believe, I must have made some kind of pact with myself that day. A pact to find the answer, wherever it might lead me. A few days later, I don't remember the exact circumstances, a friend of mine lent me a book called The Power of the Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy. I had never read anything related to spirituality or self-help before, but at my friend's suggestion, I began reading it that night. The book talked about how you can program your subconscious in a positive way, and as first exercise, it asked you to think about a time when you wanted to wake up and program your internal alarm clock. I did. And to my complete surprise, it worked. I woke up precisely at the time I was supposed to. That did something. I was hooked. I finished the book and feverishly began reading others on the subject. There were a few German authors like Rüdiger Dahlke and Thorvald Detlefsen who wrote about psychosomatic illness. I read about mental training and more books about how to tell the subconscious what you want. I was like a sponge, soaking up everything available on the subject. Suddenly my bedside table and floor were overflowing with books by authors like Shakti Gawain, Louise Hay, Dale Carnegie, Napoleon Hill, Linda Goodman, Erhard Freitag, and many more. Not only did I read everything I could find, I made an effort to apply what I had read to my everyday life. I was mostly unsuccessful, but I kept pursuing this newly discovered way of thinking. Meanwhile, my marriage broke apart. I was on a quest, and Heike was not. It wasn't that my way was better, but we simply weren't on the same path any longer. My inner restlessness certainly didn't help. We went through a 6-month period of intense fighting where we couldn't be in each other's company without arguing, and after she moved out, even speaking to each other on the phone was extremely strenuous. I met someone, Bärbel, who, like me, was interested in spirituality, and together we began to dive deeper into all the aspects of the New Age movement. We learned how to read tarot cards, did guided meditations for relaxation and visualization, read about crystals and Bach flowers and energy. Bärbel ran a small bookstore out of our apartment, and over time our friends became interested in similar topics. Over the Christmas holiday that year, a group of us went to a seminar with an author and spiritual leader in the Austrian Alps. The week-long workshop touched on the very themes we were all focused on: how to change one's life through the power of thought. One night during the workshop, we stayed up, sleep-deprived, sitting in a circle, blindfolded and not able to speak to each other. The exercise was geared toward letting what was hidden in our minds come to the surface, free of distractions and interference from the outside. I'm not sure how it came about, but I felt that I wanted to spend the night working on healing my relationship with Heike. We still couldn't stand each other, and this put a strain on Max, our 3-year-old boy. I think I realized that I simply couldn't deal with the fighting any longer. It was too painful. All night, while sitting on a pillow, resting my back against the wall, I spoke to Heike in my thoughts. I didn't have any specific techniques at hand, but had read something about forgiveness and its power to change things. I think I simply wanted our relationship to be healed and not fight anymore. It was a long night, and I don't think I thought of anything other than my wish to make peace with her. The night ended, and a few days later we all went back home. I visited Heike the next day to spend time with my son, and felt that something had shifted. We weren't fighting. We were friendly with each other, cautious but not hostile. Over the next month or so, our relationship completely transformed, and we simply stopped fighting. It was as if the reason for the fighting, some wrongdoing on both our parts, fictitious or otherwise, was taken out of the equation. Something else happened around that time. It must have been either 1991 or 1992 when I ordered a book from a local bookstore. A different book came by mistake, and that book changed my life. It was as if the train of my life had come to a switch point, and without me knowing it, it moved onto a different track. That one went parallel to the old one for a while, but at some point it moved in a completely different direction. At that time, though, I had no idea. I picked up the book from the local bookstore and almost sent it back. I don't know why I kept it, other than the notion that what followed next was inevitable. The book was called Liebe heilt, which is German for Love Heals. It was written by Jenny Wright Davis and Bruce Davis. The original English title, The Heart of Healing, was published in the US in 1985. The book was about two people on a spiritual journey. It was autobiographical and touched on many of the same spiritual topics I was interested in, but it also entailed something else. As part of their journey, the two authors had discovered a set of 3 books called A Course in Miracles, ACIM. Liebe heilt included several passages from it. It wasn't the book itself that did anything. Yes, it was fascinating to follow the journey of 2 very dedicated people and learn about their process, but what got me were the passages from A Course in Miracles. I remember very clearly sitting at the round kitchen table of the apartment Bärbel and I lived in, reading Liebe heilt until I got to this quote from A Course in Miracles. You cannot understand how much your Father loves you, for there is no parallel in your experience of the world to help you understand it. There's nothing on earth with which it can compare, and nothing you have ever felt apart from him resembles it ever so faintly. Those were the most beautiful and profound words I had ever encountered. The passage touched me on a very deep level, and one I had had no access to until then. I found myself sobbing without knowing why. As A Course in Miracles wasn't available in German, I read everything I could get my hands on related to it. Gerald Jampolsky's books were among them. He wrote very passionately about his experiences with A Course in Miracles, and I read all of his books multiple times. My outer life was in somewhat of a chaos. Since I had left the army, I didn't have a real job. I sold insurance and organic dog food for a while, was an instructor in a health club, and worked as a personal assistant in a small publishing company. Bärbel and I split up, mainly because I met someone else at a Bachflower workshop. My search for whatever it was I was looking for continued. I didn't yet realize that the thing I longed for wasn't to be found anywhere on the outside. I moved back in with my mom, her husband, and my sister. Moving in with my mother was healing in many ways, as we hadn't spent much time together in my teens. I enjoyed being with them and even had my own room on the 3rd floor of their townhouse. My mom's husband, Henner, introduced me to classical music by making me 2 tapes that I listened to on my Walkman. Max Bruch's Violin Concerto No. 1 and Felix Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor opened up a whole world to me that I didn't know existed. The power and beauty of some of the pieces have stayed with me until now. My memory of the sequence of events is a bit hazy here, but I remember strolling through a flea market one day when I saw, out of the corner of my eye, a painting of Jesus among a stack of other paintings. I felt a strong yet strange pull coming from it and decided to look at it closer. I thought it was very cheesy, showing him sitting on top of a hill in a moonlit night praying. I bought it for 5 Deutschmarks. It was bulky and heavy with a thick, elaborate gold-painted frame, and I had a hard time carrying it home. I prominently hung it on a wall in my room. It was too big for the space, but I didn't want to take it down. It had an eerie quality to it, and I was strangely comforted when I looked at it. At roughly the same time, I ordered the original English language edition of A Course in Miracles. I remember trying to translate the first 50 miracle principles into German and failing miserably. I tried to read it, but other than a few passages, didn't get very far. In short, I had no clue what the Course said, at least not specifically. But I remember laying on my bed, placing the book on my chest, knowing with every fiber of my being that I had found my path, whatever that meant and wherever it would lead me. The hundreds of books I'd read previously had led me to this moment of realization that I would not need them anymore. They could not get me any further on my journey, as I had taken the bus, a taxi, a subway, and a car to get me to the airport, where I would now board the plane that would eventually lead me to my destination. I built a small altar under a skylight in my room and placed the book on it. I must have left the window open one day, and it rained onto the book, more specifically onto lesson 121, Forgiveness is the key to happiness. I still have this edition with the wavy and crinkly pages visible. I know now that healing the relationship with Heike was the direct impetus for me finding A Course in Miracles, and lesson 121 is the perfect representation of this. A very basic principle learned over a 30-year-long process is this. For any pain, problem, or difficulty, forgiveness is the one answer, the universal healing balm that moves us onto a gentler path. It might not, and probably won't, happen right that instant. Not because the principle doesn't work, but because we are so afraid of it. We are afraid of true forgiveness because we are afraid of the love it unveils. I will attempt to clarify this in more depth later on, but for now, for me, the connection between forgiving Heike and finding the Course, and thereby moving my life onto a different path, is undeniable. Forgiveness is the key to happiness. Here is the answer to your search for peace. Here is the key to meaning in a world that seems to make no sense. Here is the way to safety in apparent dangers that appear to threaten you at every turn and bring uncertainty to all your hopes of ever finding quietness and peace. Here are all questions answered. Here the end of all uncertainty ensured at last. A Course in Miracles, Workbook 121, paragraph 1:1-4. The torment I found myself in didn't subside. Even though I had reached a major switch point in finding the Course, I simply wasn't ready to let go of the pain yet. It wasn't that I was in emotional turmoil 24/7, but pain was my companion for sure. It was an emotional toothache I couldn't shake off. It came in the form of an unfulfilled longing for something I still was unable to grasp. There's one period of time where it seemed intensified. I had fallen in love with a girl at the health club I worked at. Her name was Iris. It was a mutual attraction, but she was in a relationship, albeit not a good one. We were together for a short and intense time. When she broke up with me, I felt such a deep loss inside, it shook me to my core. It was as if the world I had known until then broke apart. I was certain the deep emotional pain I felt would never end. I remember kneeling to no avail in front of the painting, begging Jesus to take the pain away. November Rain by Guns N' Roses was on the radio, and one line of the lyrics burned itself into my memory. Nothing lasts forever. even cold November rain. I could but hope. During that time, Jesus became somewhat of a go-to guy when the pain became overwhelming. I prayed to him endlessly, it seemed. Sometimes I would cower under the painting, curled up in a fetal position, begging him to do something, anything, to relieve me from this deep existential anguish I experienced. My mom and her husband eventually moved away, and my sister, her boyfriend, and I stayed in the house. During that time, I began to read Absence from Felicity, the story on how the course came about, by Kenneth Wapnick. I had gotten a small electronic translator and went through the book page by page. The book is a deeply moving, fascinating account I will attempt to summarize below, as there's one more connection I need to make before diving deeper into my search for truth. The connection between A Course in Miracles and Jesus. See you soon.